Welcome back. This is part 2 of Swimjigs. We're trying our new way of doing things where we split it in two. This is an interesting bait, guys, as you've seen throughout the discussion. Let's get into it. Let's see what else we can learn today. Let's talk about some of the retrieves. Now that we've discussed what the thing looks like and how it's built, let's talk about some of the retrieves. In recent history, one of the, and I'm sure it's not recent, I'm sure it's been known about for a long time, but recently it's just been brought to the fore. One of the most famous retrieve techniques for the swim jig is something that's called an Alabama shake. And what this is basically you fire the jig out, keep your rod tip at sort of a 45-degree angle, constant wind, and you shake the tip of the rod whilst you're winding it. I think it's a very effective technique, and I think you can get a lot of work done with it. However, I feel that if you use the right trailer on your swim jig, you don't need to shake the rod tip. There's plenty of soft plastic baits that have been developed in the last, say, 10 years that have got enough thump in them that they thump so hard they will actually move the swim jig from side to side. They'll make it roll and they'll make it do that. So I think that if you got onto a swim jig bite and you spent the entire day doing this, you would probably tire yourself out quite quickly. Whereas you could just do kind of a straight wind and get exactly the same result. I'm not belittling the technique. It is a good technique. I have done it. It works. Some of the guys that I've spoken to that use the same technique say that it makes the swim jig come through the vegetation easier. I think that, in my opinion, if you select the right swim jig, you don't need to do that. And we'll get into that just now. For most applications with a swim jig, as far as the retrieve goes, if you just use a good steady wind, speed it up every now and again, slow it back down, speed it up every now and again, slow it back down, pop it if you want to every now and then, just to make the skirt flare. You want the skirt to flare and create movement in the water with the trailer. Most times that's going to get it done. It's not hard. One of the things that's often overlooked with a swim jig, because of the design of most swim jigs, they come through cover really well. Doesn't really matter what the cover is. They come through it well. They don't like rocks that much, particularly jagged rocks. But boulders and things like that, they've got no issue with. We spoke about in the construction where the head is kind of a cone shape or a bullet shape. You do get different shaped ones as well, as we saw. But they come through vegetation fairly well. So don't be afraid when you're winding it over the top of some vegetation or over the top of some branches or a bush to just kill it. And let that swim jig just swim down into that little hole that's there, or whatever the case might be, and just pop it up and down a couple of times. If you don't get any interest in it, just pick it up and just start winding again. Another thing that you can do with a swim jig, which most guys don't seem to do, which I don't understand because they'll go to a different type of jig, is to pitch it. There's no reason why you can't pitch a swim jig. If you're going down a bank fishing some grass or some eelgrass or tules, reeds, or other emergent vegetation, and all of a sudden you come up and there's a lay-down stump coming off the bank like that, or a lay-down tree coming off the bank, just take that jig and pitch it right in there. Don't be scared, guys. It's a jig. It's got a weed guard. It's not going to get stuck. You don't be crazy about it, but pitch it into the holes and stuff. Just do it. It's called a swim jig for a reason. It will swim straight back out. One thing that they don't excel at, and this is a technique we're going to get into way down the road, but I'm going to name it now. They don't excel at it, but you can make it work, is skipping docks. If you use the right swim jig, something between like a 1/4 ounce and a 3/8 ounce, I've done it. I'm not good at, I actually suck at skipping. But you can skip a swim jig under a dock. And that little snack coming past there underneath that dock looks like a little baitfish or a little crawdad or whatever the case might be. Lunched. Bass are on it. They're eating it. So where do we fish swim jigs? Well, for that we need to go to our map. So let's have a look at the map. Once again, we go back to our wonderful generic map. Guys, we've spoken about the reason that a swim jig was designed was probably to be, the probable design was for it to be used around emergent vegetation, grass, weeds, pads, that type of stuff. So as for last week's bait where we discussed the lipless crankbait, you're probably going to use it in a lot of the same places. So, like we discussed, this green water is our shallow water. There will be emergent vegetation in our green water as shown on the map. So, all the usual suspects: pads, tules reeds, eelgrass, any type of water willow, particularly water willow, is very good. When the lake comes up and it floods into the bushes, or in the shallow water here, when you have got a lay-down tree on the side of a bank that you can swim it through the branches of the tree, riprap banks where you might want to go to a more kind of pelagic baitfish type color, like this guy here, clay banks. I believe that you can fish swim jigs just about anywhere if you have the right application and the right swim jig for the job. As I explained to you earlier, although I don't have one on hand because I have left them in America, I made those huge swim jigs, 1 ounce swim jigs. And that's the kind of thing that I would swim on these submerged creeks, road beds. Drag it on the bottom. Just let the trailer kick and let that thing move from side to side. Pop it every now and again, let the skirt flare, and you can fish it in this deeper water. The jig head is 1 ounce on those baits. Why would it not work? And in fact, it does work. We'll get into the time of year thing a little bit later, what I have planned for that bait. Here's some docks. We spoke about the fact that I suck at skipping, but you can skip under docks. Absolutely. You could also wind parallel to the docks, in front of the docks. If you go over this area here with a boat with your sonar running and you see there's a brush pile, great place to swim a swim jig through. If you're a bank fisherman, it is one of the best baits for bank fishing because you can literally throw it into anything. If you are fishing a swim jig that has got the cone or bullet-shaped nose with a decent weed guard on it and a trailer, guys, I'm telling you, you can throw it literally onto the bank. There can be the thickest pads, the thickest grass, and if you keep a nice steady wind, the bait will swim through that vegetation. That is why it is called a swim jig. There are very few places that you cannot swim a swim jig through. The only place I can think of where it would be ineffective is when you have mats. Some places in the world, they call them a cheese mat, where it is so thick that you are forced to fish a bait like a frog. But any other type of loose vegetation, you can absolutely swim a swim jig through. If you think about the same thing we discussed in the previous video about what it is supposed to look like, it is supposed to look like a bait fish. Where do bait fish occur in a lake or a river or a dam? Most everywhere. Most everywhere. Sometimes they are supposed to look like a crawdad, and I accept that, but for me, the majority of the time, a swim jig is a bait fish. So anywhere you encounter bait fish on your particular body of water is somewhere where a swim jig could work. And guys say, well, it doesn't work in open water. I've just showed you how it can work in open water. On a recent tournament that I watched, the guys had stopped throwing the jig head minnows, little 2 and 3 inch minnows on 1/8 and 1/4 ounce jig heads. All of a sudden we're seeing 6, 7, 8 inch minnows on 3/8 ounce and 1/2 ounce jig heads, so that they can fish in different parts of the water column. What's to stop you throwing a 1/2 ounce swim jig with a nice big paddle tail trailer on it and doing the same thing? There's no rules, guys. Just because that's how they marketed doesn't mean that's the only thing you can use them for. You can use them for anything that you want. Don't be intimidated or put off by marketing. What does the bite feel like with a swim jig? It's a bit of an odd one, this one, because I have found that it's kind of similar to the lipless crankbait, which we discussed in the previous episode, and also can be sort of condition dependent. Most times, if you're fishing a swim jig in sort of stained to dirty water, if you get it around the fish, they will hammer it. There's no mistaking that it's a bite. They will absolutely club the bait. But there are times when you're fishing in kind of stained to cleaner water where you'll be winding the swim jig along and all of a sudden it just goes a bit spongy, or it feels like it's gone weightless, or you've come over a branch or something, and you'll wind up the slack and your line will be over there. And that's when they just swim up behind it, grabbed it and carried on swimming. So you've got to be a little bit aware. What I like to do when I fish a swim jig is I kind of keep the rod sort of pointed at let's say like a 15-degree angle downwards towards the water, with my tip pointing towards the water, and like at 45 degrees to the bait. And I just, when I'm winding it like that, and you can see the rod tip will do this with if you're using a trailer, the rod tip will do this. It'll vibrate with the movement of the bait. And sometimes what you see is you just see one tiny little tick like a, and then you'll see the line moving in the opposite direction. Just wind all the slack out of the line, because there'll be a bow in the line from where the fish is swimming off. Don't hit it before you take up the slack, because if you strike, you think that you're striking there, the fish is there, and the fish is already over there. And when you strike it, all you're striking is you're striking the bow out of the line. You won't even contact that fish. Not even if you strike the way I strike, which is, I've been told by several people, is completely unnecessary. I don't think so. So you wind down your slack, set the hook, and just off you go. Most times, I would say about 75% of the time, they're quite savage with a swim jig. They don't play with it. They hit it hard. And as we've discussed in other videos, when you have fish hitting baits that hard, you know you're doing everything right. The color is right. The speed is right. Your winding speed is right. The trailer is right. Everything is good enough to upset that fish into such a state that it wants to kill the bait on the end of your line. And that means A+. You've got it all right. Let's talk about time of year. For me, the best I have done with swim jigs personally is from the summer to the fall. That doesn't mean that they won't work at other times of the year. I'm sure if you slowed your retrieve down and sped your retrieve up, you could pretty much use it throughout the year. I personally have not had very good success with them in super cold water, but again, if you change your trailer or your retrieve, you could find a way to make them work in cold water. But let's say for this exercise, if you fish them from the late spring to the late fall, that's going to be prime time for your swim jig. So what am I looking for when I go to buy a swim jig? Well, as you guys know, I don't buy many swim jigs, but I will put some examples or some brands at the end of the video for you to go and have a look at as alternatives or as examples of different swim jigs that you might want to look at. What you want to look for with a swim jig you need a few basic colors like we discussed with most other baits that we have. Let's get rid of this guy. You always need to have a few basic colors. So let's have a dirty watercolor, let's say a black and blue. Let's say your lake has bluegills, like a lot of the lake, or in South Africa, tilapia. A green pumpkin is going to get that done. You always need to have some kind of a white or pearl or crystal color swim jig. You may want to have a white and chartreuse if that is your thing. If that's your favorite color, white and chartreuse will get it done for you. And then specialized colors. If you know for a fact that the bass in your lake are feeding on that type of baitfish, let's say that they feed heavily on perch, yellow perch in this case, that's as good as I can make a yellow perch anyway. If you want a generic baitfish color that will cover most things, you would want something with a pearl belly and then some kind of green or watermelon or metallic green on the back. That guy's going to get it done. But if you were going out and you only wanted to buy a couple of swim jigs, I would say a 1/4 ounce and a 3/8 ounce of each size. You must have each size when you're learning to fish a swim jig. Black and blue, green pumpkin, and some type of white. That's going to set you up for pretty much any situation when you're learning to fish a swim jig. What do I need to look for when I'm buying a swim jig? The hook. It's all about the hook, guys. The head, you either want a cone head to fish in through thick vegetation, or if you are planning to fish a lot more in open water or around riprap or around boulders, this will still come through weed and vegetation, but the bullet head shape is far more effective for that than you would go for this type of head. Most important is the hook. Remember, we discussed earlier, if you're fishing with braid, you want to go for the heavier hook, and if you're fishing with fluorocarbon, you can go for the slightly lighter wire hook. That's has been developed because of fishing vegetation in places like Florida. They fish mainly braid on their swim jigs there. They're fishing through heavy vegetation. They know that they need to hit that fish in heavy vegetation, and then they need to move it. If you live in a place that has that type of vegetation, look for a swim jig that has the stoutest hook possible. There's a lot of jig brands that make both. The one that comes to mind at the moment is Dirty Jigs. They have the standard brand, and they have one called the No Jack. And the No Jack has got a super stout hook on. Perfect for braid. Guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate all the participation. I hope you've learned something this week. It's a fantastic bait to play with. Not a lot to learn about it other than just be patient with it and fish it as much as you can. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.